In 1971, 60% of Americans were middle class. Today, it's 49%. And falling. That's not a recession. That's not a policy mistake. That's a pattern that has destroyed 7 empires before us. And we're further along than you think. Today, I'm going to show you the 8-stage pattern that killed the middle class in Rome, Spain, Britain, the Soviet Union, and 3 other empires you've probably never heard of. Then, I'm going to prove to you, with data you can verify yourself, that America is currently in stage 6. And stage 6 has never been reversed. Not once. Not ever. This isn't politics. This isn't left versus right. This is math. This is history. And history doesn't care about your vote, your beliefs, or your hope. It cares about patterns, and the pattern is clear. Every empire that loses its middle class follows the same 8 stages. Stage 1, expansion and prosperity. The empire grows, wealth flows in, and a middle class emerges. Artisans, merchants, small landowners, people who own something but aren't part of the elite. This is the golden age. This is when everyone believes the good times will last forever. Stage 2, financialization. The empire stops making its wealth from production and starts making it from finance. Money lending becomes more profitable than building things. The elites shift their wealth into abstract assets, loans, bonds, speculation. The real economy starts to decouple from the financial economy. But everything still looks fine on the surface. Stage 3, debt explosion. The government borrows massively to maintain its expansion, its wars, its promises. Citizens borrow to maintain their lifestyles. Debt is no longer seen as dangerous. It's seen as normal, as smart, as leverage. Nobody questions whether it's sustainable because everyone is still getting richer. On paper. Stage 4, asset inflation. Land prices explode. Housing becomes unaffordable. Stocks skyrocket. But wages stagnate. The middle class can no longer afford to buy the assets that created the middle class in the first place. Ownership concentrates at the top. The gap between those who own and those who work becomes a chasm. Stage 5, currency debasement. The government prints money or debases the currency to service its debts. Inflation starts eroding purchasing power. Savings become worthless. The government insists it's temporary. Every empire says this. None of them are right. Stage 6, middle class collapse. This is the point of no return. The majority of people can no longer afford housing, healthcare, education, the things that define a middle class life. 2 income households struggle to achieve what one income could easily afford a generation earlier. Entrepreneurship dies because only large corporations can survive the costs and regulations. The middle class doesn't disappear overnight. It erodes slowly, then all at once. Stage 7, social unrest, protests, riots, political extremism. The population looks for someone to blame. Immigrants, other classes, other nations. Trust in institutions collapses, violence increases, the system becomes unstable. Stage 8, system reset. The empire collapses or restructures completely. The currency is replaced. Debts are wiped out or defaulted on. A new system emerges from the ashes. Sometimes it's better. Usually it's just different. Now let me show you 7 empires that followed this exact pattern. And then I'll show you where America is right now. Let's start with Rome. In the early Roman Republic, around 200 BC, Rome had a strong middle class. Small farmers who owned their land, merchants, craftsmen. These were the people who made up the Roman legions. They had a stake in the system. They fought for it because they owned part of it. Then Rome started conquering Carthage, Greece, Egypt. Massive wealth poured into the city. And the elites realized something. Lending money was more profitable than farming. Financialization began. Wealthy Romans started buying up land. Small farmers who couldn't compete with cheap grain from conquered territories and who fell into debt during military service sold their land, or lost it. By 100 BC, most of the land in Italy was owned by a small number of families. The latifundia system, massive estates worked by slaves, replaced the small farms that had built Rome. The middle class of farmer soldiers effectively disappeared. All that remained were the very rich and the very poor. Rome tried to manage this. They created the grain dole, free bread for the masses. They put on games and circuses to keep people distracted. Bread and circuses. It worked for a while. but the middle class never came back. And here's the key part. Rome debased its currency to pay for all of this. The silver denarius, which had been 95% pure silver under Augustus, was diluted over and over again. By the 3rd century AD, it contained less than 5% silver. It was basically a bronze coin with a silver wash. Anyone who had saved money in denarii watched their savings evaporate. The middle class was destroyed not just by land concentration, but by currency destruction. By the time the Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476 AD, there was no middle class left to defend it, just elites and peasants, and the empire fell. Now let's jump forward to Spain. In the 1500s, Spain was the most powerful empire on earth. They controlled the gold and silver mines of the Americas. Wealth poured in. A middle class of merchants, craftsmen, and small landowners thrived. But Spain made the same mistakes Rome did. They borrowed massively to fund wars across Europe. They became financiers to the rest of the continent. And they stopped producing. Why make things when you can buy them cheaper from abroad with all that New World gold? The problem was inflation. All that gold and silver flooding into Spain drove up prices. Spanish manufacturers couldn't compete. The middle class of producers was wiped out, and the government, drowning in debt, kept debasing the currency. Spain declared bankruptcy 4 times in 40 years, 1557, 1560, 1575, and 1596. 4 times. By 1650, Spain's middle class was gone. The country that had ruled half the world became a declining power. The pattern had repeated. Let's move to the Netherlands. In the 1600s, the Dutch Republic was the first truly middle-class society. High wages, property ownership, a thriving merchant class. It was the richest place in Europe. But then, financialization kicked in. The Dutch became the bankers of Europe, and they experienced one of history's first massive asset bubbles, the tulip mania of 1637. Tulip bulbs, of all things, became speculative assets. Prices exploded. Then, they crashed. The middle class took the hit. Wars with France drained the treasury. Debt grew. The currency weakened. By the 1700s, the Dutch middle class had eroded. The Netherlands went from global superpower to a minor regional player. The British, who were just entering their own expansion phase, took over, which brings us to Britain. The British Empire in the 1800s created the largest middle class the world had ever seen. The Industrial Revolution made Britain the workshop of the world. Engineers, factory owners, skilled tradesmen. They built an empire on production. But by the early 1900s, Britain was shifting to finance. The City of London became the global center of banking and insurance. Meanwhile, World War I required massive borrowing. Britain went from the world's largest creditor to a debtor nation in 4 years. After World War II, the pattern accelerated. The pound was devalued in 1949, then again in 1967. Housing became unaffordable for the middle class. Wages stagnated. The empire dissolved. By the 1970s, Britain was in crisis. Strikes, power outages. The IMF had to bail them out in 1976. The middle class that had built the empire was collapsing, and even Thatcher's reforms in the 1980s couldn't bring it back to its former size. Today, Britain is a financial center, but its middle class is a shadow of what it was. In 1870, Britain produced 25% of the world's manufactured goods. By 1970, it was 5%. The pattern had played out again. Now let's talk about the Soviet Union. You might think a communist system would be different. It wasn't. The pattern doesn't care about ideology. In the 1930s through the 1950s, the Soviet Union industrialized rapidly. They created a version of a middle class, skilled workers, engineers, teachers, people with education and stable jobs. They didn't own property in the Western sense, but they had security. Housing was provided, education was free, healthcare was universal. But by the 1970s, the system stagnated. Growth stopped. Resources went to the military and the party elite. Consumer goods became scarce. The ruble, which had never been a strong currency, became nearly worthless. A black market dominated the economy. The Soviet middle class, those engineers and teachers, couldn't afford basic goods. Their savings meant nothing. Corruption exploded because it was the only way to get anything done. And in 1991, the entire system collapsed. The middle class was wiped out overnight. The oligarchs seized the assets, and Russia is still recovering. In 1970, Soviet wages had about 60% of the purchasing power of American wages. By 1990, it was 15%. The collapse of the middle class was total. Let's look at Argentina. In 1913, Argentina was the 7th richest country in the world. Richer than France, richer than Germany. They had a massive middle class. There was even a saying in Europe, rich as an Argentine. But Argentina followed the pattern. The government spent massively on populist programs. Debt exploded. They printed money to cover it. Inflation became chronic. In the 1980s, inflation hit 3,000%. 3,000. The middle class evaporated. Today, Argentina cycles through crisis after crisis. The middle class went from 60% of the population in 1950 to 35% in 2020. They're stuck in stages 7 and 8. Unrest and attempted resets, but they've never recovered. The pattern trapped them. And then there's Venezuela, the fastest middle-class collapse in modern history. In the 1970s through the 1990s, Venezuela was the richest country in South America. They called it the Saudi Arabia of the region because of the oil wealth. The middle class was large and growing, but massive government spending, dependence on oil, and currency controls set the stage. When oil prices fell, the government printed money. Inflation turned into hyperinflation. 7 million%. That's not a typo. 7 million% inflation. The middle class was destroyed in less than a decade. By 2020, GDP per capita had fallen from $12,000 to $1,500. 50% of the population was middle class in 2012. By 2020, it was less than 10%. Millions fled the country. Venezuela is the warning. It shows how fast stage 6 can become stage 8 when the conditions align, from the richest country in the region to total collapse in 10 years. So now let's talk about America, because America is in stage 6 right now, and I can prove it. Stage 1, expansion and prosperity, happened after World War II. From 1945 to 1971, America experienced the greatest middle-class expansion in history. A single income could buy a house, a car, and pay for college. The middle class owned assets. They had security. That era is over. Stage 2, financialization, started in the 1980s. Manufacturing moved overseas. Wall Street became more important than Main Street. By the 2000s, the financial sector was generating more profits than the entire manufacturing sector. The economy shifted from making things to moving money. Stage 3, debt explosion, is undeniable. In 1980, the national debt was $1 trillion. Today, it's $36 trillion. Student debt went from nearly zero to $1.7 trillion. Credit card debt exploded. Households are leveraged. The government is leveraged. The entire system runs on debt. Stage 4, asset inflation, is why your generation can't buy a house. In 1970, the median home cost about 2.5 times the median annual income. Today, it's 7 to 8 times. The stock market has exploded in value, but most of that wealth is concentrated at the top. The middle class has been priced out of asset ownership. Home ownership for Americans under 35 was 60% in 1980. Today, it's 44%. Stage 5, currency debasement, has been happening for over a century. The dollar has lost 95% of its purchasing power since 1913, but it accelerated after 2008. The Federal Reserve printed trillions, then again in 2020. Trillions more. Inflation from 2021 to 2023 destroyed savings and crushed purchasing power. Every empire in history claimed their money printing was temporary and necessary. It never is, and now we're in stage 6, middle-class collapse. The evidence is everywhere. In 1970, you could work a summer job and pay for college. Today, students graduate with 6 figures of debt. In 1970, a single income could support a family, buy a house, and save for retirement. Today, 2 incomes struggle to do the same. Medical bankruptcy is the leading cause of personal bankruptcy in America. Healthcare is unaffordable without employer-provided insurance, and even then, people go broke. Starting a small business is nearly impossible. The costs, the regulations, the competition from massive corporations, it's a rigged game. Only the big survive. The numbers are brutal. In 1971, 61% of Americans were middle class. Today, it's 50%, and falling. The top 1% now owns 32% of all wealth. Real wages, adjusted for inflation, have been flat since 1973. You are working just as hard as your parents, you're just getting less for it. This is stage 6. the point where the middle class can no longer afford the things that define middle class life. It's not one crisis, it's structural. And it's accelerating. Now, you might be thinking, America is different. We're the richest country in history. We have the best technology. We have the reserve currency. We have the strongest military. Every empire thought they were different. Rome thought the gods protected them. Spain thought gold made them invincible. Britain thought the sun would never set on their empire. They were all wrong. America does have advantages. The dollar is still the reserve currency. That buys time. The military is still dominant. That enforces the system. American innovation still leads the world. That creates wealth. But these advantages are eroding. Other countries are moving away from the dollar. The military is overextended and increasingly expensive. And innovation doesn't help the middle class if they can't afford to benefit from it. The pattern doesn't stop because you're powerful. It stops when you reverse the forces driving it, and stage 6 has never been reversed. Not in Rome, not in Spain, not in Britain, not anywhere. Once the middle class starts collapsing structurally, the pattern completes. The only question is, how fast? So what comes next? Stage 7, social unrest, is already beginning. Political polarization is at historic extremes. Trust in institutions is at all-time lows. Protests are becoming more frequent. Scapegoating is rising. People are angry, and they're looking for someone to blame. The system is becoming unstable. And then comes Stage 8, the reset. I can't tell you exactly what form it will take. It could be a currency reset, a new dollar, a central bank digital currency that replaces the old system. It could be a debt jubilee, either intentional or through default. It could be political restructuring. It could even be the breakup of the country itself. I can't tell you when it happens. In Rome, it took centuries. In Venezuela, it took a decade. But I can tell you this. The pattern has never stopped at stage 6. It always completes. The only variable is speed. 7 empires, 8 stages, same pattern. And America is in stage 6. You can deny it. You can hope I'm wrong. You can believe that this time is different. But the data doesn't care about hope. The pattern doesn't care about your beliefs. History is not a suggestion. It's a record of what happens when societies ignore what's already been proven. The middle class isn't being attacked by some conspiracy. It's being systematically dismantled by the same economic forces that dismantled it in Rome, in Spain, in Britain, and in every empire that thought they were too big, too powerful, too special to follow the pattern. This isn't prediction. This is pattern recognition. And the pattern is clear. History doesn't repeat. But if you ignore it, it will crush you all the same. If this changed how you see what's happening right now, hit subscribe. Because the pattern isn't done, and neither am I.